Hello, my name is Prior Chad, and I'm the vicar at St. Augustine's Episcopal Parish in Tempe, Arizona. And the following sermon was delivered on March 6, 2016, which is the fourth Sunday in Lent. Our lectionary passages for this Sunday included a reading from the book of Joshua, a reading from the second letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, and from the Gospel according to St. Luke. I focus primarily in this sermon on the Gospel passage, which is the parable of the Prodigal Son, as it's commonly known. And I hope the sermon gives you a chance, as we come to the end of this Lenten season, to reflect upon the radical nature of God's prodigal love. I hope that the sermon challenges you to reconsider certain assumptions that perhaps you hold about God's relationship to sin and salvation. Blessings upon you.
2 Sundays ago, we heard Jesus lament over the city of Jerusalem, naming it the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. I've been wondering this week, however, as I've been soaking in the parable of the prodigal, if there's more than one way to kill a prophet. You've listened to me over the last months repeat the refrain that a prophet is one who speaks for God, from God's perspective, and that a prophet's words are rarely good news for those who hold positions of power in the world. Prophets are always a threat to the status quo, and are therefore regularly killed by the powers that be. But it seems to me that another way for those in power to neutralize a prophetic message is to appropriate that message, to incorporate it into the prevailing structures of society so it becomes less of a threat. Think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In the nearly 50 years since his assassination, while supporting striking sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, he has become a national hero, a patron saint of racial equality, venerated by nearly everyone across the American political spectrum, including by those vehemently opposed to the radical causes for which he gave his life, such as workers' rights, voting rights, and the anti-war movement. All of which Dr. King sought to be inextricable from issues of race. As a nation, we're willing to share his dream in the abstract about his 4 little children growing up to be judged by the content of their character rather than by the color of their skin. But we're not all that ready to lay down our weapons or to question who pays the real cost of our cheap goods. I wonder if the parable of the prodigal has suffered a similar neutralization in our reading. It's such a familiar story, with such familiar characters. I suspect most of us are unable to hear just how radical its central message is. The story deals with the societal rules and norms at play in a relationship between a wealthy father and his sons, as a way of describing God's relationship to the members of God's family. Jesus tells the parable in response to the grumbling of the Pharisees and scribes that he welcomes sinners and eats with them. A sinner is someone whose lifestyle is not shaped by observance of the divine commandments and the teachings of the elders. Such people found themselves in communities that operated outside the communities of the faithful, in which Jesus made his home. For a host of reasons. People from the community of the faithful, people like the scribes and Pharisees, rabbis like Jesus, and most of the respectable Jewish population, did not usually share tables with people from among the community of sinners, people like prostitutes and collectors of taxes for the occupied govern familial relationships, and one son who breaks them magnificently. But it's not the behavior of either son that is really surprising, given the circumstances that inspired the telling of the story. The part of the parable that is truly surprising and utterly subversive is the behavior of the father. The father's behavior is shocking because he altogether disregards the authority of the rules and norms over him and over his treatment of his sons. One character in the story, the one who represents the community of sinners, is defined by breaking the rules. One character, the one who represents the community of the faithful, is defined by obeying the rules. And one character, the one who represents God, refuses to be defined by the rules. Are we beginning to see the radical, dismantling nature of this parable? And why, perhaps, powerful interests might want to neutralize it? If God refuses to abide by the standards and ordinances that govern who is in and who is out, if the label of sinner keeps no one from being welcomed, celebrated, and honored as a full member of God's family, where does that leave the church? Is it any wonder that we've understood God's forgiveness to be a bringing of sinners back into the observant lifestyle of the faithful, and not to be a blatant disregard for the rules and norms that separated sinners from saints in the first place? We know what to do with a benevolent God who forgives, but who leaves intact the structures that define and uphold the categories of sin and sinner. We don't know what to do with a God whose prodigal love dismantles the structures themselves and makes us full siblings with those whose behavior we have very good reason to abhor. It seems from this parable that sin doesn't have much value in God's economy. Trying to define who is and who is not God's beloved child by enumerating transgressions is like trying to spend the new Israeli shekels I brought back with me from Israel. Here at a supermarket, say, in Tempe. All I'll get in exchange is a funny look from the cashier. But there is a currency that has value in God's economy. It's mentioned twice by the Father in this story. It's the currency of death and life, of being lost and found. The Father doesn't care how much the Son has sinned. He was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And that's enough to buy the most extravagant celebration possible. Human beings are in the business of dealing with sin, of accounting for it, of segregating along its lines, of defining identity and making meaning according to its terms. But God is in the business of resurrecting what was once dead, of recovering and restoring what had been lost. This is, in the language of St. Paul from our lesson this morning, the ministry of reconciliation with which we have been entrusted by God, who was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them. To look at the world and see sinners in need of judgment is to see from a human point of view, and not from God's perspective. To see from God's point of view, we must look at the world and eagerly eagerly expect the signs of new life to appear. We must await the recovery of what was lost with open arms and ready kisses of welcome. This is our calling as a people entrusted by God with the ministry of reconciliation, a ministry of extravagant, prodigal love, a love that will always be a threat to the identity